Thank you for tuning in to Ungentrified with Kent Johnson. Ungentrified takes an unfiltered view on pop culture, music, television and film, politics, current events, and topics central to the worldwide Black community. Ungentrified is a safe audio space for celebrating Black culture in its purest form. Thank you for joining Ungentrified. This is your host, Kent Johnson. Thank you for tuning in again. I appreciate you guys. We are I don't know which episode this will be. I think this will be episode 12, but we're deep into this now. This is a thing. So I'm glad you guys have been here. And I am super excited to dig deep into today's topic because it's something that is near and dear to me, as I'm sure is near and dear to all of you. But before we get into that, let's tackle some current events. So are you ready to talk about what's been going on in the news?
I am.
All right. And this topic is very much in line with what we'll be discussing today. But not too long ago, there was discussion at BET, and this was Deborah Lee stepping down. So we have to take it in that mindset that a reboot was coming, and at this point, a reboot is always coming, but this one kind of struck a nerve with me. So the new network president, Scott Mills, at BET, revealed that the network was working on some new series, and one of the series was a reboot of the Eddie Murphy movie, Boomerang. So that, when I read that, I was like, no, this can't be happening. But it looks like it might be. I haven't heard anything else about that, but it reminded me that I guess I am becoming like that washed old man who doesn't want to see, their favorite things tarnished by new folks. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Do you think it's washed, or do you just think, you like to preserve some classics? I think that it might be the preservation of our quote unquote classics. Now, for me, I will say whoever kind of greenlit or decided it or is going to write it, star in it, which I don't think any of those announcements have been made, they have a lot to consider. Because for me, realistically, I will say Boomerang is like one of those quintessential Black films. It's not like my favorite rom-com. I'm not going to say that. But
How dare you? How dare you?
it is hilarious. It does have a lot of moments in pop culture and a lot of pop culture references that some young folks today might not truly get unless they see the film. But for me, I don't need a reboot. Like, I could leave Boomerang where it is, and that's just kind of being one of those films that you introduce the younger generation to let them know, hey, back in the day, Eddie was really trying to do his thing and showcase Black people in their 30s killing it in career and struggling in dating. So, just some real life aspects. But yeah, I don't want this reboot. This is not for me. I am not someone who is against all reboots, but I do think that certain reboots are not necessary. And that is just my personal opinion. I'm looking forward to some dope original content from more people of color. That's what I would like to see. But yeah, this Boomerang, I didn't even realize, we've talked about this offline, but I didn't even realize this was a thing until you sent it to me. I was like, what? Boomerang? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And you know what? You didn't realize it was a thing because you knew in your heart of hearts that it should never have been a thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's mostly because I don't want it. So because I don't want it, I've probably set myself up to block it out of my mind, my heart, and my soul. Probably, I think. What's happening.
You're right. They haven't identified a writer or a producing team just yet, but it is set to come from Paramount Television, but that gives us no idea as to who would be actually behind it. But you're right. So their intent is to reboot, but kind of semi-revamp at the same time. They want to keep the idea of like Marcus Graham, but they really want to dig into contemporary workplace dynamics and the changing role of gender, office politics, and like the conflict between Generation X and millennials, which I didn't know it was a thing, because a lot of times some parts of Generation X are considered millennials.
Right.
Like I'm considered a millennial by certain definitions. I don't adhere to that. I would much rather be Generation X. And then I've even heard like the mix of the two were zennials, which
Oh,
is
what?
just a
A
whole nother thing.
zennial?
Yeah, they were
Like the hybrid?
yeah, so like, because in some definitions, Generation X includes 1981, which is the definition line that I roll with.
Okay.
But in
Okay.
some houses, millennials are also considered to be people born in 1981. So it's weird. I always felt like Generation X was the last group who knew like pre-internet. You know,
Right.
who have that shift in mindset, who remembers AOL
Dial-up.
right very clearly, and like that transition between a Nokia phone and a smartphone. Like
Yes.
we know those
Yes.
shifts, where millennials have it, but not as clear as we do.
I feel like this like hybrid that you're mentioning, it's reminding me of like zodiac signs. Like, well, you're on the cusp of Libra, so therefore, you cannot be. It's like, what? Like, I know that like I roll kind of how I roll, and I guess would tend to like lean more towards your definition of Generation X then, since I did have a Nokia phone. I remember what it's like to not text, like I remember when the internet first got big. I remember when Microsoft Office first got big. Like when we obviously, when Macs were actually a whole different type of Mac than what we know and love today. So yeah, that's weird, because I agree with you. I don't feel like millennials know about any of that. Like, did you have a Razor phone? Do you even know what a Razor is?
Right? Or do
you know what a Sidekick is?
do you know that razors used to cost like $1,000? Like,
Right.
people remember razors when they were like a penny with like a Walmart plan, but when they first dropped, they were like $1,000. They were the hottest thing in the streets.
They were. And then, do you know what the company Motorola even is?
Right.
Like, I mean, at this point, like,
Right.
are you even aware? Like,
yeah. So scraps to the reboot, scraps to zennials and whatever that's supposed to mean or identify. Stay off my lawn. I am Generation X. Well, look, when it all boils down to it, no matter what you call me, my generation, whether we're X, Zennial, Millennial, we're all broke. So that's one unifying title for all of us. Is just broke. Broke and underwater on school lawns. So
that's real.
Yeah.
That is actually real. We can all identify with the student loan struggle. Like, that is us. We are in the thick of the student loan struggle. So yes, broke. Agreed.
So I know you guys are probably wondering who I've been talking to for the last couple of minutes. Well, I can tell you one thing. She's not a zennial, but I'll let you guys figure out who she is. Why don't you go ahead and tell them who you are?
Hey, so I am KB, journalist, host, TV and film critic, around the block. Worked with a couple of publications and outlets, Black Girl Nerds, American Magazine, small website called Just About Right, where some people may or may not read my recaps on some sitcoms that I love. Well, modern day sitcoms, I say, because I don't know that we necessarily have that kind of same sitcom 90s feel, which I miss. I should say that. But yeah, so it's great to be a co-host and guest on the show. So thanks so much for having me, Ken.
Oh, no problem. I couldn't wait to have you. When I was crafting the work around this episode, you were who I came to, because you and I have like the same mental space for all things like 90s film and movies and music, and television, so I was like, this is somebody who definitely has the knowledge to comment well on today's topic. So glad to
Yes,
have you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you know what? I think that's our defining factor, right? Between the Generation X and the millennials. I don't think the millennials truly appreciate how dynamic the 90s were.
Right.
Like, so many great
Yeah,
things.
because it's one thing to be like 8 years old in the 90s versus
Yeah,
being like 12 or 13. I've
right.
had this conversation with people all the time. Like, if you weren't a teenager or an early adult in the 90s, you have a different perspective. And we'll debate whether or not you can call yourself an 80s baby, but you just don't appreciate things in the same level. Shout out to all the people who are a couple of years younger than me. I love you guys. Thanks for listening.
Yes. I was gonna say, I mean, that would be me, but I still have a love and appreciation for the 90s because it's definitely the era I grew up
Yeah.
in. Like, man, it was a dope time
Yes,
to be alive.
indeed. So, KB, before we get into our main dig for today, I ask everybody that comes on the show what's on their radar at the moment. So it could be, your current favorite song, what Netflix rabbit hole you've fallen into, what book you're reading, what Google search you've been on. What's on your radar at the moment?
Oh my gosh. So, as a TV and film critic, I definitely find myself watching a lot of TV to the point where, like, it's kind of insane how much TV I watch. But what I do like about it being quote unquote off season, off prime time season rather, is that I get to dive into things that I wanted to, but I just can't necessarily commit to during regular business hours, as I like to say. So right now on Netflix, I am binge watching The Good Place. So it's hilarious. It's a comedy with Kristen Bell and Ted Danson about heaven-ish. So yeah, everyone on the show is dead, and I know that sounds morbid, but it is really kind of an interesting concept. And they're all in the quote-unquote good place, which is heaven. And a lot of them find that they don't necessarily belong there, and it's kind of messing with the balance that heaven has. So that is hilarious, easy to watch. I love. I started this show. I actually binge watched this show last week called The Bold Type. It's on Freeform about three women living in New York City, working in the magazine industry. It's really good, and it's actually coming back for season 2 next week. So that's it. Obviously, Queen Sugar is back. So I will be watching tonight live and live tweeting. So Queen Sugar's back. Younger is back. It came on last night. Those are two of my like summer faves. And then Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and Dagger is based off of a Marvel comic, and it is actually coming out later on this week. I think tomorrow actually is the premiere of that. So that's really like on the TV side what I'm with. In terms of new music, I'm not gonna lie, I mostly am 90s R&B all day. It's how I like to live my life, and I will have my songs in rotation constantly. But I did hear a new kind of ratchet summer anthem that I'm all about, and it's called "Period" by City Girls. Two women rappers from Miami, and every time I hear the production on that song, I'm living. So yes, I'm definitely here for it.
Is that the song where she's like, "I'll do your man and I'll keep mine too"? Is that the one?
I don't listen. I've been listening to it like a lot. I'm trying to learn the lyrics, but I'm not there yet, so I can't say. But I know she definitely talks about, hey, if you're broke, then move around, and I can get with your daddy. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, where was somebody was playing some song, and I'm assuming it's this one because it was like every girl I know has been talking about this song, and I heard it when I was in Florida as well. But basically the line was like, some girls hating on her, and she was like, "Look, I'll do your man and I'll keep mine too. Like, it's no problem. I'm gonna get back at you, and I'm gonna still keep my dude on the side." And I thought that was hilarious. So I'm hoping it's the same song. So if not, then there's another song out there that's equally as ratchet, which is fine for the summer. Go ahead, get your ratchet on.
Go ahead and live. So yes, I'm gonna actually play this back like 5 times so I'm gonna read the lyrics. I want to know if that's what she says, because if so, I mean, Wow. Take the summer crown. It's just take the summer crown. Like,
Let's see what's on the radar for me. So here's a random fun fact about Kent. Last year, I got really, really invested into MasterChef. I know I'm like,
ooh.
I don't know, 10 seasons late, but uh, you know how like when you've gone through your list on Hulu and it just starts throwing random shows at you?
Yes. Yes.
So one day, MasterChef was one of those shows. Actually, now that I'm saying this out loud, I realize how washed and old people-y that sounds. I ran out of shows to watch on Hulu, and they just kept throwing new stuff at me. So I watched the first episode and was like, "Oh, okay, this is a thing. I like it." You know, it kind of reminded me of Chopped, and that was probably why it came up. I was just coming off like a Chopped binge, but
Oh, yep.
yeah, like I got really invested in it, like to the point where I would watch it live, which rarely happens. Where it was like, well, I gotta hurry up and get home because MasterChef is gonna be on. I gotta find out who made it to the next round. So, I came back from Thailand a couple of days ago, and it's kind of like realigning back to life, and part of that is trying to get back on a sleep schedule. So I've been up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, like wide awake. So turned on Hulu and saw that I was 2 episodes behind on the new season, which was great for me because I had 2 episodes to watch. But I'm currently back on MasterChef. I need to catch up on Queen Sugar. I stopped like last season. I got caught up. It's really hard to commit to like new things as far as TV watching. I don't remember watching this much TV like 6 years ago. But now it feels like I've
That's
watched
right.
so much.
That's actually real.
Yeah. And I don't remember this at all. So, but now it's like, okay. Oh, they about to drop Luke Cage. Oh, wait a minute, hold up. They just dropped 3%. Oh, wait a minute, Queen Sugar just dropped. Like, it's so much stuff. And I'm like, all right, I got to allocate time. And look, I can't. So, I've got to set some space aside to catch up on Queen Sugar. I heard Cloak and Dagger was really good. A few people that I know went to the premiere. I think it was last week or so. And
Oh, good.
yeah,
Was it the one in LA?
yeah, I know there was one in LA. There was one in New York too, if I remember right. Yeah,
Yeah.
like
Shout out to my friend. She actually did she was the host for the panel in
what was
LA.
that?
So
Joy.
Joy,
Yeah, shout
yep.
out to Joy.
Shout out to Joy. She did a great job, doing some dope things. But yeah, she was the moderator for that panel at the LA premiere, with the cast. So yeah, like, I mean, I cannot wait to see it. I know it's going to be
Yeah,
phenomenal. I'm a huge fan of like all things Marvel, so I'm like yes, and also because they have the Runaways on Hulu is really really good. So I'm hoping this one's good, but I'm not worried. In real life, I'm definitely not worried because I know it's going to be a dope show.
yeah. What needs to be on my radar, and I need to order it, is Zora Neale Hurston's new book, Barracoon.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I don't know anybody who's finished it yet. I think it dropped like 2 weeks ago.
Maybe 2 to 3 weeks. I'm honestly the days are running together, so my dates are kind of off. But
Yeah.
I'm like,
So, like I said, I've seen everybody like, oh, I got it, but nobody's finished it yet, or at least nobody said that they finished it yet. But I'm deeply like invested into what that story is, and it's on my reading list. So that's a pre on my radar. So just getting you guys ready for what's coming next and what I'll be reviewing soon. Music wise, I've fallen into one of those moods that you're kind of in right now, like where I just put my iTunes on shuffle and let the magic work. Nothing new has really grabbed me recently. Like there's nothing on repeat. I have fully accepted that Boot Up is a jam, so I will put that out there. It took me a while, and it's finally here. Like I randomly walk around the house and be like, "Ba-do-dee-doo." Like so, it has set its claws in me. I give it about a week and then I'm gonna let it go. But fun thing about that song is like a year and a half old. So it's like you never know when your time to pop is going to be. But yeah, that EP that song was on had been out for quite a while. And I don't know, that her tipping point was at the right time because it feels
at the right time.
Yeah, it feels very much like a spring summer kind of jam. And I think it kind of taps into like that 90s R&B feel that kind of transcends age. Doesn't matter if you're a Generation X, Zennial, or Millennial. Like it kind of resonates with everybody. So I'm here. I'm on the Buddha bandwagon, and I get y'all. I finally understand it. So
they got you.
It got me.
They got you.
It got me. So let's go ahead and roll on to today's main topic. And as I mentioned when we were talking about current events, the topic is Boomerang, or as we'll be talking about it in the title of this episode, the story of Marcus Graham. So I love Boomerang. It is a movie that I will watch no matter what I'm doing. Back in the day when people had cable, and when I had cable, if Boomerang came on TVS or TNT, I would sit and watch it as if I had never seen it before. And whatever plans got canceled. Like it was just a thing. And it wasn't as if I didn't have a copy on DVD or a copy on my computer. Like it just is what it is. I think certain movies fall into that space for me. Boomerang, Coming to America, The Color Purple, What's Love Got to Do with It, Love Jones. Like it's just, whenever it comes on, I just stop and watch it. Forrest Gump is another movie like that where I'll just stop and watch it like I've never seen it before. But Boomerang holds a special place in my heart. If you've been riding with Ungentrified from the beginning, or if you've gone back to the beginning and listened to the trailer, I talked about like the 3 fictional characters who made me who I am today. And Marcus Graham is one of them. So I just wanted to dig into like the history of Boomerang and really kind of flesh out what that movie meant to me and to the Black community, millennial, zennial, whatever, as a whole. And as I started to dig, I learned a lot about Eddie Murphy, the man, and just what was going on around that time. Because in 1992, when the movie came out, I mean, I was 11. So I had a very different appreciation for the movie and the climate then versus me looking back now as an adult and being able to appreciate the power of that movie at the time. But yeah, so let's go into a little bit of background about Boomerang. So this is 1992. Well, scratch that. Let's go a couple of years before. This is 91. So Eddie was just coming off of 2 quote unquote disappointing movies at the time. And we're saying disappointing as far as like Hollywood reception. So these 2 movies were Another 48 Hours and Harlem Nights. And I know to hear the word disappointing and Harlem Nights.
I was just about to say, that doesn't even go in the same sentence. Harlem Nights is a classic.
Right. So that's also, this is purely by Hollywood standards. Those movies didn't do as well as people had hoped. So he needed a comeback. That's the kind of space that he was in right now. And he got a lot of flack for Harlem Nights for its treatment of women in the movie. Like the scene where he shoots, was it Jasmine Guy? Like that got a lot of flack.
Pushback. Yep.
I didn't realize at the time that he was catching it for his portrayal and treatment of women in that movie. So, like I said, he was in search of a hit, and he sought out Reginald Hudlin, who at the time was riding high because he had just scored a hit with House Party, which is another Black classic.
Classic.
Right.
I mean, if you're not dancing in your seat right now, just thinking about
Right.
it.
I remember, I'm telling my age, I went to see House Party in a movie theater with my cousin who was old enough to buy us tickets to get in there. So like I had a movie theater experience for that. It wasn't like a VHS at home kind of thing. I didn't have that for Boomerang. The first time I saw Boomerang was in the comfort of my home, but for house
Oh, yeah.
party, I definitely did, which is so funny to me. But shout out to older cousins who sneak you into the movies when you're not supposed to be there.
Let me tell you, love them because that's how I was with Jurassic Park. Snuck me right on in. I said, yes, front row.
Yes.
So, yes, shout out to the older cousins. I don't even know if people still do that now.
Right, yeah. I think now the kids just like I'll buy a movie for the for Frozen and go see Showgirls or something. I don't know. Like
Right.
it's nobody's really checking like that anymore. Eddie had an idea about a player who gets played. He had the story and he came to Reginald with it. And Reginald was like, I'm down, let's do it. And you mentioned earlier rom-coms, and Boomerang really is the beginning of like the black rom-com era for our generation. It kind of kicked that whole thing off. I mean, there were movies before, but nothing kind of felt like Boomerang.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree with that in the sense from like the black film perspective, that it really was one of the first ones to kind of usher us into that new wave.
Yeah. So fast forward to June 28th, 1992, which is the release date of Boomerang. So personal history, I remember my mom going to see that movie, and I remember I had to take my little sister to go see like Fern Gully or something while she went to go see Boomerang, and I was mad because I wanted to see it. I wasn't even 11 then. I was 10. My birthday was later on that summer, so I was 10, but I was still hyped to go see the movie. Didn't get to see the movie then. Didn't see it later until it came out on VHS, but it came out June 28th, 1992. The budget for this movie was $40 million, which is kind of a lot for the 90s.
Right. I'm like, that's actually well above a lot of films that were coming out around the time. A lot of other black films, rather.
Yeah. So Eddie still had enough of a draw behind his name to get the funding, even though he had two, quote unquote failures or disappointments. So 40 million was the budget. It ended up grossing in the US 70 million and worldwide 131.1 million. And funny enough, Boomerang was called a failure when it came out. It was called a critical failure. But at the same time, at the end of the year, it was the highest grossing black film of the year and one of the highest grossing films of the year. But it was called a failure. It was panned critically. Critics called the movie fantasy and unreal, referring to the cast and the characters that they played. They said that this wouldn't exist in the real world. There wouldn't be no high-powered Lady Eloise type company. Okay. Critics couldn't see that, and I'll let you figure out which critics couldn't see that.
Right.
But Entertainment Weekly gave it a C- as far as a review and called it a borderline disaster. I'm feeling triggered and attacked right now. Like, how dare you? A borderline disaster? That's a direct quote, by the way. Rolling Stone named it one of the 10 worst movies of 1992. They talking about your people right now. I don't think y'all understand me.
Wow. Like, of 1992,
yes.
Like, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and as much as we love the 90s, there are some really low points in the 90s. Boomerang is not one of the low points.
A lot of low points, in fact.
Yeah, there's some things I try not to remember about the 90s that should have never made it out, but it did. But yeah, so 10 worst movies of 92. Variety magazine, the review in there, here's a direct quote as well. In Boomerang, Eddie Murphy straitjackets himself in an ill-fitting comedy vehicle that's desperately in need of a reality check. Again, another reference to things being unreal or fantasy.
Right.
Another quote from that review is, this picture's iconography is a fantasy world. So white critics really had no vision. They were Ray Charles to like the idea that Black folks could be educated, successful, happy.
Right. That they could be anything beyond what the sideshow character in a film. outside of being the maid or the butler, that they could be at the top of their game, that two young Black professionals could be competing for, a seat at the table versus com- competing against their non-white counterparts, that they really are at the height of their careers. That's unrealistic. Wow.
Right,
Okay.
right. And let me really put in perspective what black film looked like in this era. So black film was having a really, really, really good moment. In that like 91, 92 kind of time frame, the movies that came out were the sequel to House Party, that was 91, New Jack City, also 91. Boys
Mm-hmm.
in the Hood was,
New Jack City, which is great.
yeah, Boys in the Hood, 91 as well. In 92, later on that year, Malcolm X came out, Serafina, Mo Money, which is, I'm not saying, I know to lead with Malcolm X and Serafina, then say Mo Money, it's not on the quality level, but it did come out in 92. Juice also came out in 92. Kid and Play were at the height of their fame, so Class Act came out in
Right.
92. Deep Cover, South Central. So there were a lot of black film and black actors and black directors getting their checks at the time. So this was a good space to be in. But when you look at those movies, like you look at South Central, Deep Cover, Juice, New Jack City, Boys in the Hood, these really told of, I guess, an idea of a black space that critics were familiar with. So they could stand behind, folks being in the hood and shot up or being crooked cops and things like that. But they couldn't fathom, black success. And it really showed. It was so bad that Eddie even wrote an article in the LA Times kind of countering these reviews. Like it was bad. Let me give you a quote from that article. He says, "For every step we inch forward, for each iota of progress, there will always be those trying to knock us back down, and there will always be some who cannot accept our success. My new film, Boomerang, directed and produced by the Hudlin brothers, is the latest outlet for those critics who feel it necessary to demean and simplify the achievement of black people." So, like, this was a super black moment for Eddie Murphy. I don't ever recall him having this kind of stance on black film.
I think that's because this film was so important for other people to see. And so, with you, obviously going down the list of films that came out in 1992, obviously, for me, I'll say the best film, hands down, was Malcolm X, right? But it wasn't just Malcolm X. Serafina is a phenomenal film. I loved it. I watched it all the time growing up. And even though, Mo Money isn't necessarily what you call a classic, it's funny, right?
Right.
So, like, ultimately, like, you still laughed. You still had a good time when you watched it. Boys in the Hood, I think, is a fantastic film. And obviously, John Singleton got a lot of praise for that film critically. But again, to your point, a lot of the films that critics loved in 1992 dealt almost solely in stereotypes. And I think that Eddie recognized that it was time to kind of change that and give a fresh perspective, which is why he made every person in this particular film a success, right? Which is why we're seeing black products. So we're seeing Lady Eloise have her own line of beauty products. And while she doesn't, obviously I'm diving a little bit more into the film, but while she doesn't necessarily have controlling stake, there are still people on the board of directors that are black and do have a controlling interest in the company. We never saw that. I was really thinking about how, like, in the opening scene when he first comes into the office, how the majority of people who worked there were black. That was also almost unheard of in Manhattan, like in New York City at the time. That's insane. He only wanted black models. Like, it was just nice to see that level of representation. So I understand why this was so important to him, because it was necessary during that time.
Right.
And I think a lot of times, and I found just being in this industry and being a film critic, there are a lot of dynamic films by people of color that get terrible reviews by non people of color because they just don't understand it. And I think that's why, critics of color are so important, because we understand the layers and the nuances of film. And we'll talk about, certain things and and dive a little bit deeper into this film in particular, but there are certain things about this film that only Black people could really understand, and that's why we like it so much, right? There are things that we can relate to because it is essential to the Black experience, and it's all things that we, are in the trenches, so to speak, together about. And white critics just wouldn't understand that. So I think that's why having diverse voices represented in film criticism in general is important, because there are some films I know that are coming out soon that you guys will see that I had the pleasure of seeing at Sundance that got almost some negative reviews by non critics of color, and I for the life of me can't understand why, because they're masterpieces, right? Like they're so good, but that will directly impact who goes to see the film. So a lot of times the critics are coming out with their articles right before the film drops, and that impacts who sees it. So I think it's really important to have unique and diverse voices. I understand why Eddie did the LA Times article. I think, it showed not only his passion for the issue, but also he wanted people to see his film.
Yeah.
And he understood the power of film criticism. And if someone said, hey, your film is a C minus, I'm definitely not going to spend my money to go see it. That's impactful in a lot of ways. And not only does it impact this film, but it impacts the ability for people of color to make additional films in the future.
Right. Yeah, he definitely knew the weight of the responsibility that he had. And in reading that article in 2018, it just felt like deja vu. Like this is the same discussion we're having today.
That we're always having.
Yeah, even with powerhouses like Black Panther, there were articles that came out like, is Black Panther too perfect? And I was like, how can you say that? If this were any other movie, nobody said these same words about Titanic when it did major things back in, was that 97? Nobody said these things. Like, why can't a movie be great and just be great on that? But there's, like I said, critics know the power that they hold behind, the words that they put out. And this was definitely a different space. Like, I think critics had more credence in the 90s versus what they do now, because now you have like your Rotten Tomatoes, you have all this space for word of mouth to travel much farther than it did before. And you don't have like your Siskel and Ebert kind of space in the critic world anymore like you did back then. Actually, Siskel and Ebert actually gave the movie really good reviews, which is funny.
Which is funny.
Yeah, he enjoyed the movie. Roger Ebert, he enjoyed it very much. He thought it was a great film. So shout out to Roger Ebert. But yeah, they knew what they were doing, and for him to be compelled to speak out on it, it was definitely an issue at the time. And so one of my favorite moments of last year was at Afropunk in Atlanta. I met the two women who run this company called Black Market Vintage. Shout out to them. But they had a copy. Well, they do work to collect like Black nostalgia memorabilia. And they had a copy of the Jet magazine that talked about Boomerang. So I bought it immediately. So I have it. I need to put it in like a glass case, but I have it. So I read through that article preparing for this, and just to see the things that were said, it was very much like Oscars So White, or like the diversity talks that we're having even to this day in 2018. And it's funny to think, like, as a consumer in the 90s, I would never think that we would have gone through like a drought of Black media like that we seem to in the like early 2000s and up to now. But I think like we're kind of getting back to that point. But to go back to this quote unquote fantasy world, Boomerang was the first time I remember, and you touched on this, like seeing young Black professionals who loved what they did. They were incredibly fly, and they worked with all Black people. I had never seen that before.
Never.
And it was like, to me, it was the perfect Black life for a kid in the 90s. Like, you wanted to grow up like the Cosbys. You wanted to go to school at Hillman. And then when you graduated, you wanted to work at a really dope company like Lady Eloise, and and then we take it a step further. You wanted to have, a chance to live with your homies, like, and living single. Like, that's what you saw as your trajectory as a young black cat, or at least I did. Like, it just made sense to me. It was progression. So to see, a company like Lady Eloise portrayed, it blew my mind. Do you remember the first time you saw the movie?
I'll be honest, I don't, because I was too young to watch it. My mother wouldn't let me watch it when it was first released. She was like, "You are too young for this." She was like, "The sexual content in here," but she definitely saw it. But she was like, "No." So I saw it when I was a little bit older, a little later on. So I don't remember the first time I saw the film, like the year that I saw it. But I do remember that the first time I saw it, my first thoughts were Eartha Kitt's fantastic, and Tisha Campbell. Tisha Campbell at the time, I don't think she was married to Dwayne yet, but Tisha Campbell is a comedic delight. Like, I remember just thinking, Eartha Kitt is insane and awesome. Love her. And Tisha is really just the best person to go against Eddie Murphy shot for shot. Like, their scenes together, like, she cuts him at his knees. It's hilarious. So I do remember thinking, man, they're crazy. And also, I will say, the first time I watched it, I do remember thinking that Angela was too good for Marcus. I was like, she's too good for him.
Yeah.
Like, Marcus gonna mess this up.
Yeah,
he doesn't deserve Angela.
it's so funny to see Halle Berry and kind of like a low key supposed to be like the regular girl, where I think after that point in her career she was never viewed as that again.
Yeah, she's like the girl next door in this film, essentially. Like, and I just was like, wow. But I rewatched it like again for this podcast a couple of days ago. And I was like, well, I still feel the same about Angela being too good for Marcus, so that's the same. I still feel the same about Eartha and Tisha, and I definitely see how this film opened the doors for films like Brown Sugar, The Best Man, even Love Jones, and more. Like, I think what I liked about the film, even from a very early age, the first time I did see it, was that it captured the Black dating experience, and it showcased those high-powered career roles that we saw in a way that I hadn't really seen before, like trying to juggle and manage the two. And so, now that I'm older, obviously, and now that I live in New York City, which adds a completely different dynamic, watching this film again a few days ago really took a whole different meaning. Like, personally, because I was like, oh wow, I can relate so much more, being in my 30s now and living in the same city, for sure.
Yeah.
Corporate woes and all.
For me, the first time I watched the movie, it was very much the viewing you did with a kid, with your parents, where it was like, okay, cover your eyes, cover your ears. So I saw like the very made for TV kind of version of it the first time, but I still got to see like the Black images in positive light. So that was the takeaway from my first viewing. But I remember watching it as like a teenager, and then later on in like college as an adult, and then even now, like, where it really kind of set in as someone, who's worked in corporate America and in Atlanta. I've been lucky to work in spaces where I work in majority Black spaces, where, these were executives, these were directors, and, shout out to Eddie back then. And this was probably in direct response to the flack he was getting for his portrayal of women in Harlem Nights. But this movie had a lot of powerful Black women in it. It had directors, women who were of their own mindset and didn't necessarily worry about getting married and having that traditional, quote unquote, adult life. They were creative. They were sexy. They were educated. They were ready to go toe to toe with anybody. And that was another thing that, kind of opened my eyes as a kid. Like, wow, he gets to work around these really dope women all of the time. Yeah, and it was like they still had fun. Like, they did their job, they got their check, and they still had fun. So it was definitely goals. for young Kent at the time. And
I want to go here and I want to work here and I want to hang out. Yeah, like you're just thinking, wow, they're living the life. For me, I will say I never, and I tell people this all the time, I can't pinpoint a time in my life where I actually wanted to live in New York City. Like I can't, you see it's always the backdrop of a lot of major films and you're like, ooh, this must be like the pillar of success. Like you move to the city, you dominate that city, you have made it. So I've never actually remembered a time where I went to live there. Maybe like once when I was a small child. But seeing this film now and actually living here in a time where I never thought I would, working in corporate America and having to deal with the like dating issues as a black woman, I was like, wow, wow. I was like, this film is so relatable. Like there are a lot of things, but I was like, yes, yep, yes.
so
So I think because you mentioned you watched it like in college, you watched it, like as a teenager. I think you can watch it at various points in your life and still take away certain things, but it's never more relevant than when you are actually in your 30s and going through the same thing. You're like, wow, I was so young and I thought so many things, but now we're here and yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Like, my mindset has definitely changed about it. I felt like the movie, it grew with me. As I
Mm.
grew, so did the movie, and I think that's why it's so important to the mindset of like us Black 30 somethings, millennials, zennials, whatever, ennials, uh, because it grew right along with us. It had different meanings. Like, of course, we all know the catchphrases from the movie, and we all remember particular scenes, but it resonates so much because now we kind of get to live it and have that kind of comparison versus before, where it felt like something that was attainable. It's here for a lot of us, like you said, in your New Yorks, in your Atlantas, in your LAs. It's very much a day to day for us. So now we get to say like, oh, am I being the best Marcus I can be? Am I being the best uh, Jacqueline I can be? Like it means a different thing to us now. Why do you think it's so important to the mindset of like 30 somethings?
I don't know. For me, I think it showed realistic aspects of dating and love. So I think when you're young, you have these preconceived notions about how it'll be when you're in your 20s, when you're in your 30s, and beyond. And I think that this film wasn't necessarily like the type of film, like the film could have ended with no happy ending, right?
Hmm.
But that still would have been very realistic in terms of like how dating and love is and trying to figure out that aspect of your life. So, like obviously Marcus has, I will say, I was watching the film again and I was like, wow, Marcus has these like grossly unrealistic expectations in a lot of ways, right? Like he just believes that like his ideal woman needs to be A, B, C, or D. And when you think about it, Angela's not necessarily any of those things that in the beginning of the film he feels like, his ideal woman has to be, but she ends up being his perfect match. One, because they have like something deeply rooted in friendship, right?
Right.
And then two, because she challenges him in ways that he's not been challenged before, but also she's just something different. She's something dynamic. And I think that like it's nothing like growing up and realizing those things within yourself, right? So you see him kind of go through it in the film. You're like, Marcus is so ridiculous. Like, what are you talking about? He pulling back the sheets for these ladies' feet. He expects the things, like he's like, no, it has to be this, that, or the other. And his friends are in his ear telling him, like, my dude, you need to relax. Like you need to realize that like human beings are make mistakes, but Marcus never sees the errors in his ways, right? When it comes to dating, he's like, no, 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 no. I'm the best. So like I deserve the best. And it's like, well, Marcus, I think we want to have several seats because we really need to address some issues with you as well. We're all human beings. We could all work on ourselves. But he doesn't see that, right? Until he interacts with Jacqueline, who's basically like the mirror image of him
Right.
and forces him to be like, wow, I actually probably should stop doing this to women, and I should probably take a step back and I should do this. So for 30 somethings, I think it's like a look in the mirror, right? It's just a reminder that we're all human beings. We all make mistakes. And also that sometimes a friend that you weren't expecting can turn into a love.
Hmm.
Like that
Yeah, and it goes back to, his kind of apology letter to women where he realized that, hey, women can do these things and do them better than me. Because remember, he was going after,
Right.
him and Jacqueline were going after the same job, and he didn't get that. So he was really at
Same
like a
job.
low point. He didn't get Jacqueline. He didn't get the job.
Right.
He was actually like cutting up at the job too. At that point, they had like sent him to take a break, so he was really at a loss.
Right.
So it can really go both ways. Some people were like, he saw something different in Angela, but some people say that he saw like safety in Angela. Like it was him as a hurt puppy
Mm.
kind of going back and being like, well, let me take the safe route now so that I can feel good again and build myself back up. But that's a discussion for another episode.
Ooh, right, right. Because I'm like, hold on. Don't make Angela
Right.
the puppy.
Right. And Angela is not. Angela was, to me, was perfect. But, fun
Mhm.
fact, he never looks at Halle Berry's feet in the movie.
He
He
doesn't.
does
I
not.
wonder if that was cut though.
Yeah. I
Like, I wonder if that was a part of it originally and it was cut.
I think I would think it would be intentional, or if it was cut, they did a scene where he went to go pull and then decided he didn't need to look.
Not to.
Yeah. But yeah, he never looks at her feet in the movie. Um, but that's one of those things you find out and you look in retrospect and you're like, oh, that kind of aha moment. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of discussion around like Marcus's growth as a character throughout that movie, and then knowing the history of what he was going through as Eddie Murphy, the person, the actor, the creator, and how that played into the movie at the time definitely fills in holes as to the story. But uh, we've talked about things being unreal or a fantasy world, and a lot of the reviews kind of harped on one scene in the movie, and it was the scene where Eddie, Eddie Murphy, David Allegreer, and Martin Lawrence are in the suit shop, and they're just talking, and they're being like hounded by the people that work there, and that whole interaction. And critics couldn't, they didn't see it for that scene either. They had um, issues about it. They felt like it was racist and that it would never happen. Again, I'll let you decide which critics were saying those things. But in that same LA Times article, Eddie speaks on that as well. And he says, for those who believe that black people, regardless of their status, are not confronted with racism on a daily basis, it's time to realize what's really happening. The scene in the clothing store in Boomerang is not at all far-fetched. And we as black people know that it is not at all far-fetched. But critics at the time just couldn't grasp that, there are underlying racial things that black people deal with on a regular basis in 92 or in 2018. We still have those issues where people act like racism is a thing. But why do you think that clothing store scene had a lot of white critics up in arms at the time?
So I'll say first, the clothing store scene is the most realistic scene in the film. Like, I should probably preface it by saying that it is one of the most realistic. So they're worried about, the film being completely unrealistic. That's actually one, if not the most realistic scene in the film. I think for some white people, it's just difficult to watch.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that we as black people have to be on. We have to be aware. We have to code switch just to survive in this world. That's our truth. And these truths weren't created out of thin air. I mean, they were created from our experiences over many, many, many years dealing firsthand with racism. So the reality is no matter how much money we as black people gain in this life, there are still some places where we cannot go at all or where we have to be very, very cautious. There are still places where we are immediately judged by the color of our skin. And I think that the critics are upset because it presented, obviously, they're upset because it presented them in an unfavorable light.
Mm-hmm.
But Eddie Murphy wasn't saying that all white people are like this way, but he was saying this is a reality. I mean, there are some white people who do this. I've been followed in a store before on more than one occasion. Like, so while not every white person has done this to a person of color, it has happened. It is something that we deal with. It is something that is infuriating. It's exhausting. It's saddening. But it's also something that we have to navigate and tread very lightly because I mean, just being real, we have to worry about, keeping our lives. So we have to even still be cautious in those scenarios where we aren't even in the wrong because, it might not end well.
Right.
So,
yeah. And this was something, it made sense to me as an 11-year-old because I had interactions like that at that point in my life.
As a child.
Right. So it made complete sense to me. It didn't, and like you said, it is the realest scene in the movie. And if you take that scene on its own and pull it out of the movie, it actually has a different tone than the rest of the movie.
It does.
Yeah, it feels very intentional. But it made complete sense. And like you said, to the point now where, I mean, in that the scene ends with Eddie kind of confronting the racism head on by acknowledging, hey, white dude, we see you watching us. We good. But we fear that in 2018 because that might end up in somebody calling the police and us being dead. Or, so it had a comedic effect then, but it still resonates now. And it's really a part of like Black people's form of healing where we take those negative moments and are able to turn them into laughter or comedic moments. But yeah, it when I was reading the reviews and really trying to get the mindset at the time, to see that keep coming up in conversation, I was just like, oh, you guys have no idea. And you really get frustrated when, things that are true are brought to light and don't put you in the best light.
When art reflects true reality,
right.
And people are confronted with the facts that this is the truth, they don't like that level of confrontation. Yeah. And so they just didn't know how to handle it. But again, like you said, to your point, even as a child, I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely what happened. I mean, it's happened to me. I'm a child. So this was the, again, most realistic part of the film. But I think it was intentional in the sense that he was trying to show, again, like I mentioned, he was trying to show, he's surrounded by successful Black people. He works with them every day. This is the standard. But even when he goes outside to Fifth Avenue to a store, he's still not as respected as he is within those, kind of four walls.
Right.
And I think that was something.
Yeah. And
to bring to light.
And I think that's Marcus Graham, the character, Eddie Murphy, the person. Like it didn't matter who would be in that space. And when you think about it, like, these were just Black people having a conversation in a store. Like, they weren't doing anything crazy and still had to be presented with that. And that is so much a part of the Black experience.
The Black experience?
Yeah, it just is. Like, and it's sad that we have to dedicate a part of our brain to that, but it just is a part of our daily life. And on that note, we're going to take a brief break, but we'll be right back to wrap up this episode of UNGENTRIFIED after a word from one of our sponsors. This episode of UNGENTRIFIED is brought to you by Black and Abroad. Black and Abroad is an online travel community dedicated to inspiring and celebrating the experiences of Black travelers and expats. Interested in traveling with a hand-picked group of individuals just like you? Check out Black and Abroad's curated travel experiences in destinations worldwide. Upcoming trips include Cartagena in June and Johannesburg in December for Afropunk. You can find out more about Black and Abroad and its upcoming journeys by visiting weareblackandabroad.com. When I think about Marcus Graham and like the importance of him to Black men, like I said, he is very much who I have strived to be. I still am working on getting my Marcus Graham lifestyle together. But I think just in speaking to what Marcus Graham means for Black men, especially Black men who have gotten to some level of success in their life and they feel comfortable, their money is okay, they still got student loans. I'm not gonna say their money right.
Don't get crazy.
Right, I'm not.
Still have student.
Now that's a fantasy world. But it was very much like a blueprint for what success looked like for us as a black woman. What was it like to see like a Jacqueline Breuer or Angela Lewis? Did that kind of help shape what you saw as black success for women?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely will say that, there are a lot of things growing up when I looked at them, the first time I saw the film, I thought, wow, they're really successful. Jacqueline's very powerful, right? She is opinionated. She is really great at her job. She knows what she wants out of life. I really like that. I liked that Angela was different, but still equally as brilliant. They're both two brilliant black women. They both have two different paths and they both have two different approaches, but it didn't take away from the fact that they were able to attain a level of success, kind of forging their own path and in their own ways. So, for me, even just watching it again, I thought, wow, how dope is it, to be able to see two black women, but represented, just two multifaceted versions of black women. So Jacqueline, you have Jacqueline who's so focused on her career, that she's not going to allow Marcus or any man to deter her from those career goals, right? And I think that's something that I related to as a child growing up, and just kind of like in my household, seeing my mom work really hard to get to where she is. And also as, a career professional now in this day and age. I think we as black women, kind of struggle with that at some point. To a degree, you kind of feel like you can't have both. Like, can you really be where you want to be at your career and, have that dope partner that you're really looking for? So that was one thing where it's like, wow, like bringing that up and watching it again, I was like, wow. And then just seeing Jacqueline in general, because I was like, you know what? Like, to a degree, you're like Jacqueline, she kind of believes that she can't have both, but also she doesn't want both. Like, and it's very clear she's also like, yeah, I probably can't have it, but who cares, because right now I'm really focused on my career. And for me, I think that that was so impactful to see, even at a young age, seeing a strong black woman choose the life that she wanted versus society kind of forcing her to make a decision, one that she may or may not want. Like, she was just like, no, I absolutely don't want to be in a relationship right now. I want to focus on my career. And kind of even having that choice, I loved. And then I love seeing Angela. Angela took a unique path. She obviously loved her career, but it wasn't the center of her heart. You know what I mean? Like, she still had other passions and other things that she really wanted to do, and I loved seeing that about her. And I also loved that, like, once she got involved with Marcus, she got her heart broken. That's realistic. Once she got her heart broken, then she threw herself into her career, and I can relate to that, obviously, as well as a black woman. You break up with somebody, and instead of, managing kind of the emotional and mental aspects of that breakup, you throw yourself into your career because it's like the one thing that you can control. And, even when I loved it, because even when Marcus came back, Angela had already moved on, right? So, like, she had already removed him from her space. She'd already created a new normal, to protect herself. She kind of created kind of a new safety net for herself. And even when he's apologizing and like, hey, I'm human and I want to give us a shot because I realize that I do love you. She's like, yeah, about that. So I have this career, and it's going really well. I'm finally living for myself, getting to a place that I want to be. She's like, what can you do? What Why should I give you another chance?
Right.
So, yeah, I like seeing, having two very strong and opinionated black women in two totally different ways go for what they want, and ultimately get what they want, right? Because Jacqueline wanted a seat at the table. She wanted to be the boss, and she ended up getting it. She worked hard. She got that. Angela, wanted Marcus, um, at least in the beginning, which was wildly obvious to me, which is so funny even to this day because Gerard clearly could not see that. But she clearly wanted Marcus, and eventually she got what she wanted. So, yeah, it was dope to see kind of these two strong black women characters in their own right get what they want, go after what they want, and be unapologetic. Like, I actually appreciated that, from a very young age, and I still do. Watching it again, I was like, yes, but obviously still relatable as a black woman who's been through heartache, who's been through the corporate ladder, the corporate ranks, who was definitely competing, with a guy to reach the next level. So yes,
Yeah.
just how it's been. been through it all, definitely relatable, and they're definitely dope characters.
Yeah.
What about you? I know you mentioned a little bit briefly how you were like, wow, there's so many strong black women in this film the first time you watched it.
Yeah, and it it's funny how I get to see that on a regular basis anyway. Even when I worked in corporate America, these were things that were just very much mainstays. But you brought up a good point about Angela, like diving into her work. And it really felt like in the film that she was almost on like the track to become a Jacqueline. She had gotten a promotion, at the new company she was at, and had been in a space now where she was giving directives and making calls and having things happen. And it felt like she had blocked out love and was getting to that space where Jacqueline was. So it begs the question, was Jacqueline Angela at one point? Are we just seeing them in two different, spaces and time? But no, it was, and not even just these two characters. You had, Strange, you had Lady Eloise, you had all of these really different types of black women, but who were very confident in whatever space they had. Like Hallie playing Angela as the girl next door was still very much confident. Like she wasn't, like hide in the corner, didn't want to deal with anybody. She very much knew who she was and was cool with that. So you got to see like all of these different examples of black girl magic, so to speak. But so it was something that was refreshing, but it was something that I knew anyway because, like my mom's dope and like all of the black women around me at the time have been dope. And I've been lucky enough to work around really dope black women. It's just something that happens when you work in Atlanta and you work in corporate or you work in any kind of city or metro area where there's a whole bunch of black people. You just get to see that brilliance on a regular basis. It was great to see that, and I think it definitely made me, I say Marcus Graham helped to make me who I am as a man today, but also seeing these women held in such regard and to be, educated and still very much black. Like, there was no question about that at the time. So it was very dope to see for me. But
now I will say, you said something that like brought something to mind because you were like, how I wonder um if Jacqueline used to be kind of like an Angela before. And I'll say that just as a black woman, I say we go through the ebbs and flows, right? Like we have all been both Angela and probably Jacqueline at some point. Like I think life's experiences don't limit us to be one or the other. I think life's experiences we can kind of weave in and out of both. You start off bright eyed and bushy tailed, then you get your heart broken the first time, right? So then you're like, yeah, this perspective on life, I can do this. Then your heart gets broken. It changes things. Dramatically, it kind of changes your perspective. And then maybe you go into a Jacqueline phase, like, listen, I'm actually not trying to do this whole commitment thing, just trying to just trying to press ahead in the career. And then maybe you go back to Angela because you're like, all right, I need to deal with kind of the emotional ramifications of that heartache and figure it out and figure out where I would need to be. Or you just want to be Jacqueline, right? You made the choice. So I think, there are times in life where you can be both. And so absolutely, at some point, Angela probably was Jacqueline. And maybe, what we're seeing is, or excuse me, Jacqueline was probably Angela, and maybe Angela is, taking on some of Jacqueline's characteristics, so to speak. So yeah.
So we've talked about remakes and how we're tired of them. But if we were in the casting department for the remake or the reboot of Boomerang, I'll ask you, who would you have play Marcus Graham in 2018?
Yeah, so I don't think that I can actually answer this question by character. So there's like a list of dope people that I would like to see, and I wouldn't necessarily put a character to them, but I think they should be in the film, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like you think like Lakeith should be Tyler, but like what if he's really Gerard? You know, like what if he surprises you with like a Gerard performance
Right.
type situation? So, Marcus Graham, I mean, like in terms of Marcus Graham, there are like a lot of dope actors I like right now that are young, but I guess it depends on how young we're gonna go,
Hmm.
right? Like if they wanted to make this kind of a 20 something reboot versus the 30s or what. But I think his name is Trevor Jackson because he's on Grown-ish
Yes,
right
yes.
now.
And
I
Superfly,
and
which
he's
I
doing
yeah.
Superfly. Right. I really like him. And I definitely think that this could show a different side from what he generally plays. Like as an actor. So I would love to see him. Like I think he could be a Marcus Graham for sure, or he could be Tyler, right? Or he could be Gerard. So I think but I'd like to see him in the film. I'd like to have him like, kind of get that kind of opportunity. And I think I feel that way about the majority of the cast too. Like there's this really dope young woman who plays on Star. Her name is Ryan Destiny.
Hmm.
And she's like a phenomenal singer, but I'd like to see what she can do even more as an actress. So, like, I will put her in this film. Taylor Page, who used to be on Hit the Floor and Ballers, she could definitely be Angela, or in the film in some capacity. And obviously, like, I love Issa, I love Yvonne. So like from Insecure, obviously they could be in any capacity, and even Natasha, who's also an Insecure. Like, I hope I got that right,
Hmm. You
but
did.
it was harder for me to kind of figure out actors wise because I was like, would this Reboot be younger, and who's really kind of like in that age range to play Lady Eloise? Like that was actually the hardest thing for me.
Yeah.
Who could play Lady Eloise? I'm still kind of struggling with it because I feel like Tracy Ellis Ross could do a hilarious take on it, but I don't feel like she's old enough. But I feel like for a 20 something thing, maybe she is. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, oh, I don't even know.
Yeah,
So,
but I like how you went with your casting direction. You went for up and comers, like people who were still making their mark and like diversifying their acting portfolio. I'm surprised because you know what? When I asked this question before, Michael B. Jordan was automatically who came with Marcus Graham. And I'm like, really? Do you see him as a Marcus Graham, or is it because we want Michael to succeed? And I was like, I don't know if I see him as a Marcus Graham. I don't know. I've never seen him in like a comedic role.
right.
So I don't know if he could play. I'm sure he could, but I just didn't see that for him. But I think you are spot on for Lakeith playing Tyler or Gerard. I think he could do both, but I definitely see him as a Tyler. If not for that, I think Chris Rock's character in the movie, Lakeith would be good for that as well.
Oh, yes. Yes.
But
Yes.
for Marcus Graham, if we were to do, all right, if we were to play it younger, I don't know if I would do Trevor Jackson. I don't know. I don't know if he has it yet, and I could be wrong. I don't know if he's old enough looking yet to play it.
That's also true because he does look very much like a
Yeah,
teenager.
yeah. So I don't know if he's in that space yet. But I could see like plays Lawrence in Insecure. I could see him doing a Marcus Graham.
Oh, Jay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Jay
you know what I
Ellis.
thought about him? Jay Ellis. I did think about Jay Ellis as some role in the film. Yeah, he is he's youthful. Again, I'm all about like I want to see some fresh faces do something different that I haven't seen them do before and succeed. Like make me change my mind. Because I don't want to typecast you. So, bring something new and fresh that changes my mind and I can see you in a different light.
Right.
Like
Yeah, yeah, and it's hard because I think the new crop of actors still have that very youthful look about them. And
mhm,
and
mhm.
even though uh this cast was fairly young at the time, I think everybody in the 90s looked like 10 years older than they actually were in the 90s. Everybody looked like full-grown 36 years old, like 36-year-old people. It didn't matter how young they were. Like looking at Living Single, they were all supposed to be like 25, and they all looked like 30 to me. They all looked
They did.
super old. And that shout out to shoulder pads and and bad lighting in the 90s, and not giving enough space to black people behind the scenes who would know how to light these people correctly. So I'm glad we're moving in that direction. But yeah, it's hard to kind of pinpoint because the jealous part of me wants people my age to play this so that it feels a little bit close to home. But I understand like there being a need for younger actors to play this. So it was really hard for me to try to figure out who would be a Marcus Graham for 2018. Because like I said, Michael B. Jordan just seems like he's becoming the Denzel of our generation. So he would just automatically be tossed into that conversation. But I don't know. For Strange, I either saw Rihanna playing Strange.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, that would be hilarious. In fact, yes.
Yeah. And I didn't know this until I did research. Did you know that Strange's first name was Helen? I did not know that at
Oh
all. Right.
no.
Yeah. Her name was Helen
Fun fact.
in the movie. Right. After that, I couldn't even call her Strange no more. It was Helen. But yeah, so for Jacqueline, who would play a Robin Givens type role in 2018? Actually, I saw like a Tessa Thompson for this. I feel like she could pull it off because I recently rewatched Creed, and
Yeah.
and that was like she played like a very sexy kind of coy, confident woman in that, and I was like, I could kind of see her as Jacqueline. It made sense to me. I think for Lady Eloise, they would have to play her a little bit younger.
Right.
Still a woman of season and and of grace, but maybe just a little bit younger. So it would be dope to see like a Taraji kind of play that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I was like, maybe that would be something for her because she's getting her auntie status is starting to elevate where she doesn't look old by any means, but she gives off, if we were to play this cast younger, she could be that older kind of woman. And it would make sense now because, your companies for today, we have millionaires and billionaires far younger than we did 20 years ago, So if they were to play this in a 2018 kind of space and maybe have it like in a black tech company where our heads of company would be younger, so I could see.
Oh yeah, I'm feeling this black tech company theme
Yeah,
now.
look, do they need to get us on
I think that they do because it needs to, like that tech company needs to be in it. There needs to be a lot more social media, something with a dating app for Marcus. Like it's not going to be like the old days. This time, he's going to swipe left or swipe right
right.
to find, new prospects. And I also, if we were going to do that, I would want to see more of Jacqueline's experiences before Marcus and during Marcus, because we all know Jacqueline was seeing multiple people.
Mm-hmm.
Like they alluded to it. If she's Marcus's, counterpart and equal, then she's basically, the, as Eve likes to say, the pit bull in a skirt, which means, she's definitely seeing multiple people at one time. So let's throw some of that in there as well.
Right. Yeah. Let's flesh out the characters a little bit more. I think I don't know. I feel like this may be just a buzz kind of casting, but I think if they threw Kofi in there from Queen Sugar,
Oh yes, from Queen Sugar.
and kind of pushed him out to be something different because he's played very similar roles. He's been in that kind of space where maybe they put him as like a Gerard and make him kind of, or not a Gerard, a Tyler, and make him kind of the opposite of what he's played. Tone him down, make him kind of nerdy and awkward, and kind of push that out of him. I don't know if he'd be able to do it, but it would be dope to see him kind of expand on what he can do and what he's shown us he could do. But yeah, it was hard. I was really thinking about like who I would cast, and it's been hard to try to figure it out without seeming like, oh, we're just throwing everybody in there that's hot at the moment and trying to give people who are really dope opportunities. The other part of Boomerang and what makes it so special is the music, the soundtrack. People don't realize like that soundtrack was bananas at the time.
A banger.
Yeah.
A banger.
And as Boomerang was kind of the birth of the black rom-com, The soundtrack was kind of like the birth of the Black 90s soundtrack, too. This was Babyface's really kind of first soundtrack. He wrote and produced 6 of the songs on the Boomerang soundtrack, which brought us hits as Boyz II Men's End of the Road. Toni Braxton's career was spawned off of this movie, and a lot of people don't know that's because Anita Baker didn't have time to sing those songs, and he was like, I like that little girl you had singing the reference. What's her name? Tony? All right, let her sing. So shout out to Anita Baker for being busy. And
my girl Anita.
Yeah, it's so many dope songs on that soundtrack. What's your favorite song on there?
My favorite song is Give You My Heart, hands down. It's the duet with Tony and Babyface.
Yes.
That's it. I listen to it all the time. So yeah.
And in 2018, you still rocking that.
Oh yeah, I still listen to it all the time. All the time. It is my jam. I love it. Like, he killed the production. I liked how they layered their vocals on the track. Like, Toni was relatively unknown, but she had such a distinct voice, and everyone, to your point, used to call her like the little Anita Baker, because they have kind of the same bravado and range. Mm-hmm. And whoo, I mean, I was living. I was like, yes, girl. Jam. Still. Like, listen to it all the time. What about you?
My favorite song on the Boomerang soundtrack is PM Dawn's I Die Without You, without question.
Ooh.
When I think of, like, perfect 90s songs, that song is always on the list. Like, it's impeccable to me. There's nothing wrong with that song. And I might fight you if you say that you have some concerns about that song. Like, that, I don't care what's going on in the world. That song comes on, I'm in a better place. So,
not your fight, though. Wow.
I might ball a fist up. I might. I don't know. I might do something bad. I don't know. But yeah, that's PM Dawn's I Die Without You, without question, is to me the best song on that soundtrack. Whatever happened to, like, dope soundtracks? That's a whole nother discussion, but man.
I mean, it's a whole nother rabbit hole that we can go down. Listen, as soon as you told me, hey, as soon as you asked me to be on this podcast, I was like, oh, I'm about to listen to that soundtrack. Rewatch the film and listen to the soundtrack, because the music is so heavily ingrained in my memory. So, like, the memory of the soundtrack is just as wide and just as deep as the memory of the film. That's what soundtracks used to do for us. And so I don't know what happened to that movement, but when I tell you that Black films used to be an all-out event, this was like a part of that event. And I can say I still have the Half Plenty soundtrack, which I also still listen to.
As do I.
I had that Brown Sugar soundtrack, the soundtrack to Love Jones. I mean, even the Best Man soundtrack I actually do still listen to. And the Best Man 2, not in the 90s, but, the sequel, the Best Man Holiday. That soundtrack is dope too. Like, they still tried to, they're like, listen, we're not going to leave y'all hanging because we know y'all like that soundtrack to the Best Man. So we're going to try to create a good soundtrack here. And I'm like, yes, okay, good. I'm living. Bring it back. So I don't know what happened to it, but I think there should be a reemergence of dope soundtracks, because I need it, and clearly I need new music, or else I'm just going to be listening to these 90s soundtracks for the rest of my life.
Yeah, this is definitely an example of when the movie was finished, and then the composers like Babyface and the producers got to go see the movie or certain scenes, and they wrote a song for the scene. Whereas the soundtracks we get now, it's like, all right, all of the stuff is done, and we're going to find songs that already exist that capture the theme, where it's not as directly related to it as soundtracks of the past were. So it, like you said, it was a full on event. Like, usually the soundtrack dropped like the week before the movie did. Yep. So it got you in the mindset of the movie. You playing the soundtrack on your tape deck in your Jeep on your way to the movies when you was paying $2 to get into the movies. And
a blessing. I wish we had that again.
Yeah, like it puts you in a whole kind of moment, and we don't get that moment anymore. But yeah, that's look, let's table that. Let's pin that. That is an episode for a later date. What was your favorite scene from the movie?
So I'd say I have a few favorite scenes. So, one, when Marcus and Eloise are in her bedroom and she's seducing him and he requests that the lights go off and it's pitch black, right? And then he's like, okay, can they go lower? I died. Like, that's, I'm like, it's the most ridiculous thing. Like, can they go lower? It's so dark in there already. I'm like, this man is a fool. So like that is just like all of his scenes with Eartha Kitt where she is like growling at him and all of these sexual innuendos, hilarious. The Thanksgiving dinner scene is still a classic. Also because, we got all of these different phrases like bang, 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 bang when Gerard's parents are like, they go off for an hour and a half in the bathroom to live their lives and, come back out. That's ridiculous. The whole entire conversation with Gerard's parents about how they view relationships and love and sex and marriage is hilarious. Like, real crazy, real ridiculous. I can say I probably haven't had these types of in-depth conversations over a Thanksgiving meal with my families, but we've had similar conversations. Maybe not necessarily, during a holiday, but Lord, yes. So that was hilarious. And then again, I mentioned this before, but anytime that Tisha and Eddie are on screen together, those scenes are a delight because again, she goes after him. And the first time that he brings home Leela Rashawn's character, and she has that sign that says, "Don't do it, girl." Like, run, run. I'm like, yes. And it's funny because it's like, girl, she can't even see this. Her back is to you. Who are you showing this to?
Right.
Like, what is happening? I was like, yes, 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 yes. And then, you know what? I will say too, um, in the end, when Angela asks Marcus for one good reason why she should give him a second chance, and he doesn't have one, I really like that scene because it really spoke volumes again to the like realism of love. He like, girl, I don't know. Honestly,
Right.
like
Uh,
I don't know
right.
why you should give me a second chance. Like, in fact, you probably shouldn't give me a second chance. Was kind of what he was probably thinking. Like, yeah, actually, this is probably not a good idea. But it forces them both to be vulnerable in different ways and take a chance, even though they don't have all the answers. And I think that's why I like that scene.
Yeah. One of my favorite scenes, I have a couple too, but one of my favorite is when Marcus and Nilsson, who was um, he was like the producer for the commercial. Like anytime
Yes.
he came on, it was always a question of like, was it too sexual or not? And the kissable commercial scene
Yes.
is one of my favorites. That one, and when Eddie and Melvin Van Peebles are looking at the Strange film and they're like, "Is that a nipple?"
Oh
I
yes.
think that's a nipple
Yes. Yes. Yes.
because my mouth. I just drooled a little bit like that. Um, those are my favorites. And when Strange, the restaurant scene with Strange.
Oh my gosh. Strange was going to get Marcus by any means necessary. And when she just flashed him, and he was like, oh my God, what is happening? He was like, oh my gosh. And then when she goes around like outing the different men, oh my gosh. I was like, what is
Yeah.
happening?
You can tell that they had like the most fun on set because it kind of resonated in the film. Like they were all having a good time making that movie.
Strange was just, whoo. I mean, and that restaurant scene is so over the top that you're like dying laughing because you're like, what is even happening? Like, she went off. I mean, like, she went off on Marcus when he told her no. Oh my
And
goodness.
they said that when they were filming, that she was very open to like parodying herself because people forget like Grace Jones was like the dopeness in the late 80s, early 90s. So when they wrote that character, they had her in mind. And they were like, she was the quintessential professional. She loved the idea of kind of overplaying herself and took it really seriously and wanted it to come across really well. So she was down to do whatever. Like every time they up the ante, she was like, I'm down. Let's do it. So shout out to Grace Jones being able to laugh at herself back then. But yeah, that and the scene when Angela is at the community center and the little girl comes up to explain her picture. And she's like, I don't want them there because she had like the fish under the water.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I still laugh at that no matter what. But in closing, KB, why do you think this movie stands the test of time for Black people?
You know what? I think at some point in everyone's lives, we've experienced, one or more of these scenarios that Marcus and company kind of go through, right? So, it could be that you like someone and your friend ended up asking them out first or hooking up with them first. We've all been passed up for a promotion that we thought that we deserved. And realistically, at the very least, we probably all had a crush on a coworker too, right? At some point, you're like, oh, I could see, and wasn't really sure if you should like dive into that situation or not because of the working circumstances. So I think for us, we can always see ourselves in this film, and in one place or another, like we can always relate. I mean, once you're of a certain age, obviously as a child you're not working on Wall Street, but or having these like love triangles as well. No, I don't know, maybe on the playground you're having love triangle, I don't know, but like these love triangles that are in the workplace, right? But I think too, we've all, just from like a human perspective, we all as Black people have had unrealistic dating expectations and unrealistic kind of views on love. Like we've all had those like glassy heart eyes, so to speak. And we've all experienced heartbreak. So I think that, we just can relate in some degree. And for me, I'm like, oh yes, I've had to compromise, in certain ways, in terms of like maybe I had to compromise on my personal life to get ahead in my professional career. Yes. Maybe we've all settled in ways that we didn't want to, in areas that we didn't want to. Like Marcus basically just had to settle into that same role. Even though he really wanted a promotion, he ended up having to just go back and do his job, that he really didn't want to have at that time because he was so ready for that next step, that next challenge, right? So yeah, I just think it stands the test of time because it shows the balance of love and career from the Black perspective. And we can always relate to that, at least, a portion of it, if not all of it.
Yeah, agreed. I think you hit it on the head. I think as much as we were told this was a fantasy world, we knew that it was real and that it could be real for us at any point when we watched it. Like I think if I was 20 and watching that today, it would make sense to me. And I would want that to be something, a world that I lived in. And now I know that it exists. And like you said, it touched on so many different facets of the Black experience, whether it was dating, working in corporate America, relationships with your friends. It normalized these things for us and gave us a standard that was reasonable. It gave us things that we knew were attainable for us in so many different ways. Right. It made it relatable, and it maintained its Blackness throughout. Like there was never a question or concern about that, and that is why to this day I will watch it no matter what. I'm sure if I really sat down and recorded myself, I make a reference to Boomerang at least once a week. It's just a part of like my lexicon. It's a part of who I am, and I'm gonna pass it on to my children. Like it's going to be a thing that we watch when we talk about the birds and the bees or whatever.
Watch this film. Right. No, but I think you should share because it just shows so much, and I think it should be shared to the next generation. because we don't want to lose these things. They're a part of the Black culture, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like we want to show them School Days. We want to show them Malcolm X. We want to show them Boomerang. We want to show them Brown Sugar. For me, that's the one that no matter when it comes on, I'm definitely gonna
Yeah.
watch. So you know, we want to show them all of these things.
Yes, agreed. So, KB, thank you so much for joining me in this deep dive of the story of Marcus Graham, also known as Boomerang, also known as one of the greatest movies in the Black canon. So thank you for giving us your expertise, your insight, your background, and your personal connection to this wonderful film. Tell the people where they can find you and what you got going on in the future.
Yeah. So thanks again for having me. Loved it. You know, I loved being able to chat about Boomerang and being able to rewatch it with fresh eyes. I feel like because I hadn't watched it in a while, like a few years, a number of years. So it was nice to be able to. I definitely hadn't watched it since I turned 30. So it's nice to watch it from this perspective and be able to see it again and be like, wow, and to keep it in my black repertoire, as I like to call it, my black repertoire of films. So yeah. But everyone can find me on Twitter and Instagram on social media at Lady LADY KAYB 21. And what's next for me? So just more content. I have a roundtable podcast. It's called The Show About Nothing. So we talk a lot about random topics, relationships, TV, film, everything pop culture. And so it's myself and three gentlemen. So that podcast, I'm working on some original content and really just trying to continue to be a Black woman that's about her business in the entertainment business. Still write, I still do dabble in freelance journalism, from time to time. But you just have to follow me on social media to keep up and find out more.
Yes. And of course, you guys can find me, your host, on Instagram and Twitter at Kent, KENT_ESQ. You can also follow this conversation and other conversations from past and future episodes at our website, ungentrifiedpodcast.com, and on Twitter and Instagram at ungentrifiedpod. And if you have any comments or questions or favorite moments from the film that you want to share with us, you can email. That's ungentrified@kentwjohnson.com. Again, if you like what you heard today, you can do a couple of things. A, you can tell a friend. I love it when you guys do that. Tell a friend.
Yes.
B, you can subscribe to us,
Yes.
which you should already be doing. I don't know why you're not. If you haven't, definitely subscribe. We're basically everywhere music and or media can be heard. So if you look for Ungentrified on Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Google Play, your mother's tape deck, and her 92 Caravan, we there. So definitely subscribe. And when you do subscribe, rate us as well and tell us how much you like the show. That definitely helps and keeps this thing going, because it's a thing now. Like I said earlier, this is a thing. I'm not stopping. You thought I was playing. It's a thing now.
Yes.
So yeah, KB, you're absolutely coming back when we have to do a deep dive into another moment in Black media, because there's definitely this work has to be done. This is important work that we're doing here.
Definitely. I would love to come back anytime.
Great. And hopefully you guys come back too and tune in to the next episode. Until then, we are signing off. Thanks again, KB.
Yes, thank you. And everybody subscribe to the Ungentrified podcast.
Yes, and check out The Show About Nothing. Definitely do that as well.